So it's welcome to this session relating to adulthood and ageing. We are going to introduce ourselves, and we'll tell you a bit about how this session is going to run. So I'm Jeremy Parr. I'm a clinical academic, so I work in the NHS and I undertake research at Newcastle University. I run a large program of research around autism, adulthood and ageing that links a number of projects together, something called the Adult Cohort Study. Some people of you will know about that. A big project around diagnosis, another project around anxiety with my colleague Jackie Rogers and team. There's a poster downstairs about that. And also projects around physical health and quality of life. So there's a lot going on, which is great, because of course we're trying to rebalance that situation. So I'm going to, Jane will say a bit about herself shortly, but I'm just going to let you know how the session's going to work and just remind you of a few things James talked about at the very beginning of the day. So people are welcome to leave at any time. So, if you want to leave and you want to come back in, if you could just wait until we swap speakers, that would be appreciated. The sessions are being recorded, which means if you ask a question, you're being recorded too. There's a wide range of understanding of speakers and the audience. You may, of course, disagree with what someone says and how they say it. But as James talked about at the beginning of the day, kindness and compassion are the order of the day when we're making these comments. If we could, there is time to ask questions at the end of all of the presentations, and therefore, if you could leave comments to the end rather than interrupting, that would be appreciated. And of course, there is the ever-present Twitter. And the Discover Conference, or Discover Conf, a hashtag to use. And I noticed lots of people were doing that in the Jonathan Green and Bryony Beresford's presentations. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Jane, who's going to talk a bit about herself, and then we'll introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Jane, and I'm co-chair with Jeremy of this autism ageing session. And like everybody else on the spectrum, I've experienced a unique pathway of life. So I'd like to share with you a few facts from my story, because we're all aging, and research can benefit generations of people who share the spectrum on which I live. So I'm a 59-year-old retired learning director, assistant principal, and I've taught English for 37 years, and yes, I'm autistic. When I was diagnosed, the most common response that other people said was, "You're autistic? Really? You don't look autistic." Or they said, "Wow, I never noticed." I think I had one person who said, "Ah, that makes sense." So because my diagnosis was high functioning, I received the inevitable shrugging off. "Oh, well, you've got it mildly." Really? Mild autism? There's nothing mild about my function. I've got anxieties and my lack of connections with people because of my autism. I am blessed with the cognitive abilities that identify me as high functioning. Yes, I agree with that, but to call any person on the spectrum mild is to ignore their differences in function and difficulties that that person does have, and forget that the person will age, and with age will come other health and age-associated functions that may have a huge impact on their life. It makes sense to use research to support autistic people so that we too can have longer lives, suffer less judgment and more understanding. So the credible work that research brings is a dedication to a real difference for us all, wherever we may be on the spectrum. So I was diagnosed after I'd taken early retirement from my profession, amidst the functional falling apart without my routines and the learning that helps me focus being me. But prior to my diagnosis, I was just Jane. If I said things differently, I called it Jane speak. And if I acted differently, it was, it's just Jane. So people didn't question my difficulties. Therefore, they didn't help me transition throughout my life. And you know, I didn't realise I was different. I thought it was all of you who were different, not me, yes? So I achieved a Bachelor of Education degree, a Master of Arts in Educational Leadership and Innovation, and I've studied a diploma in autism, as well as taught across all of the age ranges. So yes, my experience and pathway is different, but autism still impacts on my life. And without research, others will struggle too. I'm a retired Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Educational Assessment and a Fellow of the Society of Education and Training because my intense interest is learning. So that's my reason to function and be me. When we look at ageing and autism, the fact that individuals on the spectrum are party to research is of great importance, so society understands and recognises that the features of autism grow with us. We don't grow out of being autistic, we are autistic. So some of us, like me, have co-occurring conditions. We might also be female and have to deal with issues of the menopause or trauma and impacts on our mental health. On top of that, we might have other health conditions. So we need this research because society's way of communicating, as well as having many positives, also gives a voice to misconceptions about autism. So we must make the voice of research heard louder so that misconceptions are drowned in the success of that research. So yes, today I wanted to tell you I'm a high-functioning autistic female. So the person you see standing here today experiences the challenges of autism and ageing. And some days, you know, you might not see my autism. And other days, because of my overloads, my tiredness, or impacting health and co-occurring conditions, or anxiety, do you know how anxious you might feel just standing here? Yes? Means that you might see the ageing autistic me. So that's why research into ageing and autism is important to me. It's important for my family. It's important for the autistic community. And that's one of the reasons that we're all here today, because that's saying to me that everybody in the room is important for you too. And that's really my message to you. Thank you. So we're going to actually, thank you very much. So we are actually going to have a look at that really exciting research. Think about, perhaps Jeremy will introduce the first person that we have, or I shall do that for us. Have we got Jiedi Lei? So, sorry.
I'm being really pathetic, but the sound of screaming kids is really distracting
You can
me
hear?
from like the speaking. Would it be okay to like close the windows?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea, and if it gets very hot in here, then we'll have to weigh up the balances.
And they'll have probably gone back in.
So if you get very hot, say so, please, and we'll have a think about opening them again. I think let's just see if it's okay at the beginning, if that's all right. Just to say that there are more chairs on the way. I think Autistic are committed to your comfort as well as research and science. So
Is that an ask for more chairs?
they're on the way.
Okay.
They are coming. I think we will start because, but I think then do feel free to move around and sit down because we want you to be comfortable. Okay, we will both sit down and we're going to hand over for the first of the presentations. Can I just say this is a 10-minute presentation. There are then 2 minutes for questions. The presentation, some of the presentations are of different lengths. So at the beginning there are 2 10-minute presentations, then there's a number of 5-minute presentations, then a 10-minute presentation, and then at the end Jonathan has a 15-minute presentation. So just to say they are of different lengths, so you can expect that. Okay? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So thank you everyone for attending the Autistic conference today. My name is Jiedi. I'm a PhD student studying at the Centre for Applied Autism Research at the University of Bath. And today I'll be presenting to you a transition to university programme we've been running for a number of years for autistic students who are seeking to go to university in the UK. So to give you a bit of background about the University of Bath Autism Summer School, so shortened to UBAS, who is it for? It's really open for any students with a clinical diagnosis of autism, so that's from a clinical professional aged 16 and above, who are either seeking to apply to or already hold a conditional or unconditional offer to go to university in the UK. Just disclaimer, it's not just for students applying to and coming to the University of Bath, it's open for students who are planning to go to university anywhere across the UK. And what is it? It's a 3-day summer camp that's held at the University of Bath campus, and it does include a 2 overnight stay. So students do come to campus and they do stay with us for the entire duration of the 3 days. So that means staying in student accommodation as well. And the purpose of the summer school is really to introduce students to 3 different streams of university life. So that includes work, rest and play, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. And in terms of the logistics, so we have been running the summer school for 6 years now, so 2019 is our 7th year of being able to put on this programme, and every year around 25 to 35 autistic students come and join us for the summer school. We do have 8 daytime student ambassadors, so these are typically developing students who are currently studying at the University of Bath, and so their aim is really to show our students around campus, kind of tell them more about what university life is like from first-hand perspective. And we also have 4 overnight supervisors. That's really to stay in the student accommodation together with the students, just in case of any emergencies do arise. We do have a couple of students who do want to go home every year as well. And myself and my 3 supervisors, we oversee the entire programme every year when it runs as well. So all of the sessions that we do run during the summer school are delivered in a group format, face-to-face. Some sessions are run in smaller sessions, so for 10 students. Most of the sessions are delivered to the entire group, so all 30 students at the same time. So the first stream that we introduce students to is work. That means what is it like to study and do academic studies at university, which can be quite a big change going from studying in a school and classroom environment. So some of the activities we put on for students include giving them a sample lecture in a lecture theatre. So what is it like to actually sit in a very big room with very different acoustic settings with lots of people around you, and that can be very, very different to actually sitting in a classroom in a school. We also have lots of socialising opportunities for students to meet different staff members on campus and also different tutors. That's really to try to get them to understand what is the difference between a lecturer and a personal tutor. So how will they be able to kind of oversee your academic studies but also pastoral care as well. We always have some sessions on how to access student support on campus. So that includes what sorts of services are available for them in terms of mental health, but also how do you secure extra time for sitting in an exam, all that sort of thing. And we always have a session on disclosing autism diagnosis, which is really important, and to do that earlier on during the university application process. And this is so that universities really do have a chance to sit down, look at your application well ahead of you actually arriving on campus, so that they have enough time to process what your unique needs are and be able to put together a personalised and more tailored support plan for you for when you do actually arrive on campus. And finally, here at Bath, we really do adopt a strength-based approach. So we really do run a lot of sessions helping students identify what are your strengths really and how can you better use your strengths at university. And all of the photos here you see on the bottom, so every year we run a photo competition for the students as well. So all of these photos are actually taken by our students who have come through the summer school programme last year. So the next theme is rest, and that's really about managing one's physical and mental well-being on campus. So we run a number of psychoeducation sessions that teaches students how to better manage your stress levels on campus, how do you cope with social anxiety, what do you do when you need a bit of downtime. And we also look after students' physical well-being, so kind of introducing them to the sporting facilities that we have here at Bath, showing them what kinds of activities that you can make use of during your time here on campus. And also a big part of actually rest is just being able to stay in student accommodation halls. So for a lot of students, this is the first time they're actually moving away from home, potentially living with other unfamiliar people in a very unfamiliar setting. So lots of students actually say just the ability to kind of have the opportunity to see what student accommodation is like, be able to stay in their personal rooms and know that they have a personal space on campus that they can go to at the end of the day. That's always a really helpful component for students as well. And the final one is really around play. So that's looking at the social and leisure activities that students have access to at university. So we have student union that come and does a talk on the different clubs and societies that are available at university. And this is an area that students get really excited about because they can find lots of people that share, common interests and common passions that they have. What is it like to eat on campus in a canteen, and how do you find the food that you actually like? We take them to a social outing to the Roman Bath, so we're very lucky to have been offered free visits actually by the Mayor of Bath, who is very supportive of our programme as well. And students enjoy actually being able to take an outing to go from campus to the town itself independently, makes them feel like that's part of growing up, being an adult. And there's also lots of informal kind of unstructured socialising opportunities as well with students. So they can really learn from both student ambassadors what is it like to go to university, but also to meet other autistic students who are very similar to themselves in terms of being in that same boat of trying to apply to university and make that big transition. So unfortunately, I did plan to show you a video from some of our previous students talking about their experience at the summer school, but the audio is not working so great today, so I think we'll quickly skip that.
Students on the autism spectrum.
Can you hear that okay?
Transitions.
Perfect.
And one of the largest transitions is moving from home to university. So at the University of Bath, we put on a summer school for students on the autism spectrum who would like a taster of university life.
I've learned some new things.
Is it too quiet?
Like how I can actually use my autism to my advantage, really. In my work, like I've learned that, like how Asperger's tend to rely less on intuition and more on thinking things through, which would be very useful for most degrees. It does actually make me feel proud of having my Asperger's, instead of feeling like I should feel, bad about it. Because it does help to really highlight all the, good aspects of it.
I think this course is actually going to help me in stuff like this, where I will actually speak to people more face to face. My people and I will tend to more cooperate and do things together, and hopefully, of course, I can make a whole bunch of friends and followers.
So here are some of our students from previous years talking about their experience here in the summer school. So quickly to kind of give you a rundown of our research, the paper is now published, so if you want to actually read about it, there's the URL at the bottom of the page for you to have a look. So we evaluated the first 5 years of the programme, so 125 students came through our programme during that time, and we looked at both quantitative feedback, so has the summer school helped to ease any of your worries associated with going to university? How satisfied were you with the summer school programme overall? And the qualitative feedback is really to gain a more in-depth understanding of some of the quantitative feedback that students have given us as well. So for the quantitative feedback, we did find the summer school did significantly help reduce not just social worries associated with going to university, but also academic worries. So being able to enjoy my course, managing course difficulty, as well as daily living skills. So actually not getting lost on campus and being able to cook and make my own food, that sort of thing as well. And also most students found the experience to be very enjoyable and very helpful, and a lot of them viewed going to university as somewhat, quite a positive thing overall after attending the summer school. So for the qualitative feedback, we asked students 2 questions. The first one is, what have you found to be the most helpful at the summer school? And students really gave a whole range of answers, but a big part of it is actually being able to have the opportunity to meet other autistic students who are in a very similar position to them. And we often get, especially coming from girls, a lot of girls say this is the first time I've met another autistic girl, this is really great. And sometimes students find actually going to university is not the right thing for them. So even though we do encourage students to apply to and go to university, we very much hope that the Bath Autism Summer School offers a chance for students to really make a more informed decision as to whether or not university may be the right choice for them. And finally, second question we asked them is, what are you most looking forward to about going to university? And again, a lot of students talk about being able to pursue their academic interest, being more independent, growing as an individual, and really taking that first step to adulthood as well, which is really great to see. Finally, I'm running out of time, so future directions, we very much hope to follow this up more long term. So look at, we've been running this program for a number of years. Has going to this program really helped students to increase their access to higher education? Looking at more at some of the social changes that students go through as they go to university, how they're able to navigate different social support systems. And finally, beyond university, so what does it look like actually when they come out of the other end? So we do run a very similar employment program here at Bath as well, to help support students to make that transition to employment. So just wanted to thank our team here at Parr, Deco, my supervisors, and our wonderful research assistant who helped out on this project as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jiedi. So we have a bit of time for questions. So there's a question here and a question over there. I think you'll be able to be heard if you speak. I don't think you have to get up. No, you're fine.
Hi Jiedi, thank you for that. That was really good. The question I've got for you is there any way that this kind of project can be tailored for older people, people who are maybe going back into higher education, maybe had pretty difficult experiences at university the first time round, and maybe have been put off to going into future education? Is there any way that this can be sort of like adapted for mature students?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So currently most of our applicants are kind of in the year 12, year 13 stage. We do occasionally get a couple of people in the early 20s who are looking to go back into higher education as well. But in terms of tailoring it for graduate students, yeah, that's definitely something that we can look into in the future and yeah, try to make those adaptations as well.
Yeah, not just in the 20s, though, just saying.
Yeah, much later as well, yes, exactly.
A question over here.
Sorry, I'm genuinely not trying to be rude or critical. It's a genuine question. Your students at the summer camp, do you have them experience what it's like to have neighbours who've got their music budding at 4 o'clock in the morning, so they know what it's genuinely like to be at a university?
Yeah, so we don't have that. That's a very good point in terms of staying in student accommodation. What we do, but we do have them staying in halls. So that in itself is already a very massive step for a lot of students actually, because most of them are actually coming in from year 12, year 11 even, so they're very young, 16, 17. And we actually run some psychoeducation groups within those sessions to talk about, what are your concerns about staying in halls. So a lot of students do talk about maybe being peer pressured into drinking, that sort of clubbing. What is it really like at university? So that's a chance where our student ambassadors and our overnight supervisors are able to offer that first-hand perspective without really exposing students to the overwhelming kind of sensory experience. But I do appreciate that it's not a.
If the students have so far lived at home,
Yes.
presumably their environment is suitable.
Yeah.
They will not experience the nightmare that is living in the halls of residence.
Yes.
I think they need to know that.
Yeah.
Beforehand. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really valid point. We'll take that into consideration as well.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. If I could could I just ask one of our next speakers to come and just put your memory stick back in, because you've got the link there, but not the actual presentation. One further question.
I was a specialist mentor with the National Autistic Society at the University of Hull for a number of years. I was wondering, first of all, I think it's to be applauded. It seems very similar to the WOW project the University of Lincoln are currently running. How do you ensure a joint approach going forward beyond the initial 3 days that they're in university for? What do you think the role of peer mentoring is for autistic students, particularly other autistic mentors, mentoring autistic people?
Do you mean once students come here?
Yeah. We're going forward, because it's that's like an initial starting point, but they're at university for 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so here at Bath, for example, we do have a campus buddy system. So that is the peer mentoring that you were referring to. So all of the students with an autism diagnosis, when they do come on campus, they're offered the opportunity to have a peer mentor. What we do have we have heard, because I helped to run the autism social group on campus as well, from our students. Some of them don't really know what is it like to actually have a peer mentor, like what kind of support, what kind of questions are you meant to be bringing forward to your peer mentor. So I think part of that peer mentoring, it's really great to have that system in place, but actually thinking about how do we train our mentors to be more proactive in terms of seeking our students out and trying to help them and support them that way. So that system is in place, for example, here at Bath, but actually a lot of the student uptake is not so great actually amongst our student population.
I was thinking also about professional mentoring as well. So
yeah.
peer mentoring is an important aspect. What I was thinking about professional peer mentoring, professional mentoring sort of generally, specialist mentoring throughout the university.
Yeah.
One of the issues a lot of students have is they enrol, they disclose they're autistic, and then they assume everything's going to swing into place for them.
Yeah.
And unless they actually go seeking things, even if they've got DSA, then
Yeah.
support services aren't going to be available for them.
Yeah, no.
How do the lecturers, how do the rest of the university know that that person is on the autistic spectrum needs some support?
Yes.
Most lecturers haven't got a first idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. So for us, it's very much run through the disability support service, and they do look at that person's timetable with that individual when they come onto campus. And that's one of the first things, and look at who will you disclose actually your diagnosis to in terms of lecturers, and what is the purpose of you trying to disclose your diagnosis. And that's the autism diagnosis session that we run in the summer school as well, trying to get students to try to think a bit ahead in terms of not just telling people you are autistic, but actually what kinds of support do you really think you need in terms of going forward.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jiedi. Thank you for your questions. So next it's Alice, Harwood and Sarah Grant, who are going to talk about the experience of ageing with autism. And while they're doing that, we'll just think a little bit about the temperature in the room, because I can there are a lot of us in here, there's a lot of kit in here, and there's a lot of sunshine. So excuse me if I walk around a bit while you present. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. Yeah.
There's other noise outside. I mean, it's...
Yeah, we'll see if the noise has gone away. If the noise has gone away, we'll leave them open.
Are you okay to start? Okay. Hello everyone, thanks for coming to our talk. We're going to talk about a study we did together on the experiences of aging with autism. My name is Alice Harwood. I'm a trainee clinical psychologist, and this was part of my doctoral thesis. And this is Sarah Grant, and she was one of the participatory researchers on the study, and is also doing a PhD in her own right, but she helped me out with my doctorate. How do you get this clicking?
Just the red.
Oh, sorry.
You've taken, it's because you've taken that down. So if you just use the keyboard.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So the reason we were interested in looking at this is, as many of you might be aware, aging and autism is relatively little researched, and traditionally, obviously, autism being seen as a childhood condition, that was sort of reflected in the research arena for a very long time as well. When the first studies then came out on looking at aging and autism, it tended to be around sort of neuropsychology, how the brain matures, and things like that, rather than the individual experience of people who are sort of entering later adulthood. And we know though that prevalence studies have shown that obviously autism is a lifelong condition, so sort of prevalence rates remain the same across the lifespan. So really there was a gap in the literature that we felt we needed to sort of explore a bit more about what is it like for people in that age group. So our study aimed to explore those, and so it was quite a broad sort of aim because there hasn't been much research, especially not qualitative research. So we used a qualitative design, and we interviewed 7 people. Our criteria were that they had to be over 55 and in some way on the autism spectrum, either diagnosed or self-diagnosed. They happened to all be male, but that was more of an accident than a sort of intention. And they were all part of an autism support group. That's where we recruited from, so they had, I guess, lower support needs and were engaged in the autism community. We then used something called interpretative phenomenological analysis, which is, IPA is a bit easier to say, to look at the data and find some sort of common themes. And the crucial bit, which is why Sarah's here, is that we use a participatory research design. I imagine most people know what that means, but it's a way of meaningfully include the people who are, the group of people who are being studied in the research process. And I was new to the area of autism, so I felt it was really beneficial for me to include some experts by experience who could tell me about autism, what language to use, those kind of things. So 4 people volunteered to be part of this, 3 men and Sarah. And they were involved in sort of all aspects, from designing the questions, the materials, lots of questions in between. And Sarah also very kindly did the analysis of one of the transcripts and is doing some of the dissemination with me as well. I found it really, really helpful personally to be able to ask those questions, to be able to sort of sound out, is this language that I'm using, is that okay? Is that clear? Does this kind of question make sense to somebody on the spectrum? And that sort of idea of mutual exchange where, I'm not this sort of academic person in some sort of ivory university tower, but rather that actually there's a sort of exchange. And I found that a really nice way of doing research. There were some challenges, obviously, of making it sort of truly democratic. It wasn't a truly co-produced piece of research because of the constraints of it being a doctoral project. But I don't know, Sarah, do you have anything to add, any reflections in terms of your experience of it?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed being involved in this project. It was helpful sort of personally and professionally to me. And actually to the point that I'm using participatory research in my own PhD now. So that's carried on. I identified the most with doing the analysis of the interview because I identified so much with the participant and what he was saying while he was talking. So there were aspects like confusion and doubts around, recognizing you have difficulties but not feeling like you're autistic enough to ask for help or support. And then the passion and joy that comes with special interests. And probably the most was the emotional impact of late diagnosis and how that feels, the initial high of having an answer and finding your people, which I can't stress enough is amazing, but then the lows that come with realizing that it could have been so different if you'd have known before. So we'll talk now more about the results in this study and what came up. So there were 5 main overarching themes. There were lots of sub-themes, but we can only really cover a few of those because there were so many. So these were the 5 main ones, which were growing older, contemplating difference, relationships, life so far has been a challenge, and resources and resilience. So in the theme of, so the main findings here in the growing older theme, or just
just as sort of overall.
Just overall, there was varied experiences. So every autistic person is different, which we know already. This continues into adulthood, so it's important not to generalise. But overall, there was a positive outlook in most of the people that were spoken to, and most of them, but not all of them, agreed that life with autism gets easier with age. So, in the growing older theme, has autism changed with age? Here's some quotes from the interviews. So some of the challenges just diminish, some of them you find coping mechanisms. And Quentin saying, well, it's a bit easier actually as you get older because you've got choices. Well, somehow there's more pressure when you're young. But then Peter had a different opinion and worried that he was getting worse, and described an accumulative pile of stuff that had gone wrong in his life and feelings getting bigger and more meltdowns. So so there was quite a bit of variation in people's feelings about how things changed as they grew older.
So another really interesting theme was that about contemplating difference, and even though that wasn't a specific question we asked about, was participants spoke about sort of normality versus disability and the concepts of this. And so Chris had a really nice quote here about, so that's the message: we're not disabled, we're super abled, but we don't see it that way because other people don't see it that way, and other people tell us we're disabled. And we sort of made sense of that in thinking about the social model of disability, which some of you may be familiar with, so that it's the sort of disabling barriers of sort of society that isn't ready for autistic people or for difference in general, that actually makes people feel disabled. So we felt that was really powerful. And the other quote there from Greg is also really interesting, showing that actually Asperger's is, it happens in a social context, and when he's on his own he feels, in inverted commas, normal. This theme we won't go into because we haven't got time, and the sort of experiences of relationships are very similar to those reported in that we know from research in younger people. Similarly, this theme showed some experiences that we know younger people with autism also experience. So I guess what we can say is that those kind of experiences of bullying, being taken advantage of, not being understood, being excluded, marginalized, they can prevail across the lifespan and into older adulthood, unfortunately. And there's some quotes there that really sort of highlight that, and that also they also showed that they had an emotional impact on participants. Do you want to go into this just because of time?
So obviously, as well as those negatives, there were also some real positives, and there were some themes going right across all of the participants about resources and resilience. So this group in particular were very resourceful and self-aware, and they found ways to meet their needs in other ways. So they found jobs that suited them better, relationships which were manageable. Someone had taken up dancing so that he could have social connection, but without necessarily having to talk to people, and having friends from other cultures and pursuing their special interests. So self-help was a really a big deal and something that they'd all engaged in. So the implications for services and professionals from these results are obviously there needs to be more autism awareness in services. That doesn't necessarily need to be just autism. It's more about accepting that there is difference and that everybody has different experiences, and making society more inclusive as well. And then looking at the roles that services and society play in promoting and maintaining disability, and also research is necessary, more research to look at the needs in greater detail with varying groups. So this study looked particularly at adults in a support group, so maybe looking at adults that don't have that support from other autistic people or the autistic community, and maybe elderly people, so older than the age group that were looked at here, and also in minimally verbal people would be really interesting. So, and the final conclusion is that participatory research works, we like it, and it should be promoted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the whistle-stop tour, but hopefully that gave you a bit of a flavour.
I thought you did very well to get through a lot of information, so really well done. Okay, we've got time for a question.
Sorry if I missed it, but were all of them late diagnosed, or were some diagnosed in childhood?
They were all late diagnosed.
Do you think that affects your results in an important way?
I'm sure it did, yes. So in terms of how people saw their diagnosis, there was a theme on sort of identity, diagnosis and disclosure, which we didn't have time to talk about, but I think people were doing lots of sort of comparing themselves to other more autistic people was one of the quotes, or people with mental health problems, sort of trying to navigate their space, I think, in the autism community. And I think that definitely was a reflection on that. Most of them had only been diagnosed or self-diagnosed within the past 5 years. And there was one who'd been diagnosed 20 years, but still in adulthood, yeah.
Yeah, questions?
Just
Steve?
a simple one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether you said, but what age group were you looking at?
Yeah, so it's age 55 and over.
And I think our average was 62, was our mean age of the group.
And we'll take one final quick question, if that's all right, Stephen. Will I change the slides over?
Thank you. You said that the participants had low support needs. How did you assess that? Just by presence of participating in the support group or by another means?
Yeah, it was more qualitative, so the way that they were engaged in the support group and other sort of areas in their life, so they were all living independently. A few of them were working or in part-time employment.
They all identified themselves as being in that group as well.
Yeah, we didn't do a formal test of that.
Great, thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Just to say there are a small number of chairs available. There's a couple here, there's also a couple here if anyone at the back would like them. Next it's Keren from Keele, who's going to talk about employment in recent graduates.
Thank you. Is this working again now, or?
It's not.
It's not, so I'll go with this.
Yeah.
Right, thanks. Hello, my name's Keren, as we've just been introduced. I'm a university-based careers advisor, and I'd like to very quickly just tell you about a work experience project that I delivered at Keele and some of the findings that I got from that. So just to give a little bit of background to that, I'm, as well as being a university careers advisor, I'm part of my professional bodies, we're called AGCAS. I'm part of a national disability task group. And as part of that, I write a report each year, I co-author the report, that looks at the destinations of disabled graduates. And we have found year on year that those graduates with disabilities who are the least successful when it comes to finding employment are those with autism. And so as I was finding this year after year, I've kind of thought I wanted to do something about it. And just sort of that finding really does concur with the literature around this, that many autistic individuals, and including those who are graduates, actually are less successful than other disabled graduates when it comes to finding employment. And being based in a university, I was very mindful of the fact that actually universities have a key role in supporting graduates into the next phase, into employment. And this is something that the government thinks as well. So with all that in mind, and with my role as a practitioner, with the aim of supporting students and with disabilities when they graduate to find employment, I was very keen to do something about it. There was a group that met socially, a group of autistic students at Keele. The group was called the Connect at Keele group. And I was invited along each year for a few sessions to talk about careers. And I found that the first year I did that as I started talking about, sort of preparing for the workplace, expectations of employers, and disclosure, that there was some real fear and sort of just kind of a not really, understanding and possibly a gap in sort of, in having sort of experience of work. So I decided to, instead of just coming in and talking at them about this, that I would instead arrange some work placements. So this is what I did. I wanted to see if it helped with that understanding of the workplace. So what I did, thank you, I offered it to the whole group. There were 25 students in this group. 6 individuals took me up and wanted to try this supported work experience placements. So we had arranged sessions. They were typically sort of an afternoon that they could fit within term time. And I managed to work in partnership with an employer that was based on campus. They were called Pontoon, part of the Adecco recruitment group. So very quickly, I used an action research approach, which means that I was in the centre looking at my practice, looking at how I could improve the way that I did something. I used 3 cycles. The action research process has cycles, so I looked at the perspectives of the employer, the participants, and the disability support worker who coordinated the Connect group. I had a range of data collection methods, semi-structured interviews with the employer mentors, a focus group with the students, pre and post work placement questionnaires with the students, and weekly feedback forms, really just to catch if there were any issues for the students themselves. Just in terms of the pre and post questionnaire, I'd asked the students to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 on what did they, their employability skills, how did they think they were. And the inner sort of circle or web, a part of the web, shows beforehand how they felt about themselves. And the outer one, which is redder in colour, shows how they felt after they'd finished the placement. And it's maybe hard to see, but on this at this distance, but what they really felt they'd improved on in particular was working effectively with others and communication skills, both in writing and speaking. So some of the key findings were that actually I was overwhelmed by, even just with a short series of work placements, that, you know, sort of some of them just three lots of 3 hours, some went on for a bit longer. There were real benefits in terms of how the autistic students felt about themselves, their confidence levels, their awareness of the workplace. They actually said, a number of them said in the focus group, they were really surprised by how well it had gone. And you know, that they were like, we could really do this. And that was lovely to see as well, just their confidence. Some of them really struggled with actually thinking about how they could transfer what they'd learned to another situation, to applying for graduate jobs. So I think what I really got, one of the things I got from this was that I knew that would be another intervention would be needed to help them to see how they could use this in the future. There were some real benefits for the employers. The mentors got a great deal out of it in terms of enjoyment and feeling like they were making a difference. The mentor role, with having a one go-to person, was really key in terms of the success of the programme. There were several issues, just very briefly. There was some noise in the room, which was hard for one or two of the participants. The timing, it was hard to fit in the university timescale. And some of the students had underestimated their ability and then got slightly bored. So there were definitely learning points. My final slide, just to say what I've done as a result of this is produce a list of recommendations for other careers professionals around the country who are there are a number of different developments actually. Things similar. I've disseminated at national conferences. I've been published by the Higher Education Academy, which was quite exciting. I've been so excited by this, I've started a PhD. And interestingly, with what was just said, I'm also going to use participatory action research. The Kiel programme has carried on under a different name, but it's bigger. I've actually moved to Liverpool John Moores, where there isn't anything at the moment, and I'm hoping to set something up very soon. And that's my email address. Thank you very much.
Great, well done. 5 minutes is always a challenge. You did very well. There's a question here.
You said that was it 6 out of the 20
yes.
took place. Actually, that's a subset of the population at the university as well. So engagement is obviously an issue.
Yes.
How, from your perspective, would you like to try and, this is a great opportunity, how would you like to improve engagement in the future? What do you think are the main methods you can use?
That's a really good question. I was a bit disappointed that more didn't want to take it up because I thought that we'd offered a lot of support and it would have been great to have more. I think confidence is a real issue. Some of them it was, you know, sort of just saying, oh, I'm not ready, and they were from sort of foundation year up to postgraduate. So some of them that were saying, well, maybe next year, maybe the year after. So some of it might be just kind of carrying on doing some of the other things. But I did think that some of the people that did go on the programme came back and talked about how positive it'd been, how surprised they were about how well it had gone. So I think almost they became ambassadors for it going forwards, which was helpful. But I also wonder if mentoring can have a key role in terms of confidence, that being such a key issue. So for my PhD, I'm hoping to explore all of that and do a bit more than just the work experience placements, definitely.
So there's a question at the back, and if we could make that a relatively brief question with a relatively brief answer, that would be great.
Hi, so I'm doing my PhD with Dr. Anna Cray, and I'm focusing on diagnostic disclosure. And it seems to be such a nuanced thing that a lot of autistic individuals struggle with. And I just wondered, how do you prepare your students for that, especially because it really depends on the workplace culture that they're going into, their coworkers, their managers, and perceived reaction that they might get from people that they disclose.
So I missed the first bit, sorry. Did you say you were focusing on?
On diagnostic disclosure for my PhD.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how you prepare students for that, since it seems to be such a varied experience.
Preparing for a disclosure, do you mean in general? It's interesting. It's certainly helping them to know the facts. So, you know, what do they have to do? The answer is nothing. They don't have to disclose. It's up to them. What are some of the reasons why they might? But also, you know, sort of when would be the right time? So very much giving them the opportunity to consider when might be right, but why they also might not do it till later on as well. So I don't know if that's a very specific answer, but...
Well, it's a big topic, so it sounds like a lunchtime discussion.
Yes, let's carry on talking about that later.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's Rebecca Lucas next, who's going to talk about transition at university.
I'm Rebecca, and this is my colleague Alana, and yes, we're going to be talking about transitions out of university for autistic undergraduate students. Now, we know that increasing number of autistic students are attending universities. So just over the last sort of 8 years or so, there's been a fourfold increase in the number of first-year undergraduate students declaring a diagnosis at their university. So in the 2009-2010 academic year, about 1,200 students declared a diagnosis, whereas in the 2017 to 18 academic year, nearly 5,000 students did. So, in addition to the number of students attending university, we have a corresponding increase in the number of autistic students graduating from university. But as we've just heard from Keren, unfortunately, employment prospects aren't as good for these students as they are for the student population at large. So this really got us thinking about, well, why is this? What is it about this pivotal time in a student's life that's so challenging and can be especially challenging for students with autism? There's been very little research on this conducted so far, with the exception of some work by Vincent, which we're going to be hearing about at the end of the session, but that wasn't published when we started designing this study. So we were really particularly interested to find out what emotions surrounded the transition. Were there positive feelings? Were there negative feelings? Most likely, we expect there to be mixed emotions. We also wanted to know what aspects of the transition were especially challenging. This is important to know so we know where support would most usefully be targeted. We also wanted to know how students felt about the university support that was provided at the moment, how it was in terms of being able to access it, how useful it was, as well as their perspective on, well, would any additional support be beneficial? What form could that potentially take? So, in order to answer these questions, we needed to recruit some participants. So, we originally had an online questionnaire which we surveyed to autistic graduates, and we initially conducted some interviews with specialist support staff.
So I'm going to give you a whiz through the results because it's just a 5-minute talk. So we found that our recent graduates said the highest emotion they felt around the time was fear, which is in line with what Keren was saying her students had suggested they felt around careers. But that was followed by acceptance, sadness and anticipation. So not all negative emotions, but fear was highest. And we asked them, had they accessed support for the transition before they graduated and afterwards? And we asked them about emotional support, but also career support specifically. So around 2/3 had accessed emotional support before graduation, and the most common form of support was from specialist mentor, followed by the disability advisor and personal tutor, and just under half had accessed emotional support after graduation. And again, some of them were using their disability advisor from when they'd been at university. Encouragingly, when we asked them had that support been helpful, the vast majority of the support forms had been found helpful, apart from the postgraduate personal tutor. Thinking about career support, around 3/4 had accessed some form of career support before graduating. About half of those had been their personal tutor or their university career service, and around 1/4 had used their specialist mentor or disability advisor. After graduation, about 2/5 had accessed career support. Some still in contact with their specialist mentor or having a new specialist mentor after graduation, and some using their career service. And again, encouragingly, when we asked them had this been helpful, yes, indeed, they thought it had been. We also asked them open questions, so were there any improvements or extra support that they thought would have been beneficial? The key findings there were around wishing that they'd had some practical support with career planning, generally wishing they'd had more support or it had been advertised more to them and that it had been time to come earlier. Some felt they wished they'd had some emotional support with the transition or targeted disability support, so things like finding disability-friendly employers would have been useful. And we also asked, what advice would you give to autistic final year students? The key messages, the most important themes there were planning, so plan early for the transition, take up all the opportunities that you can, so things like work placements, expect the transition to be hard, and look after your mental health around that time.
So just to very quickly conclude, there were very mixed emotions around the transition, but fear was the strongest felt emotion. Despite this, around 2/5 of students hadn't accessed any emotional support from the university, although career support was accessed a little bit more widely and support was rated helpfully. So based on this, useful practical improvements appear to be offering more support to students, offering support a little bit earlier, targeting it specifically for autistic students as well. And so that's hopefully something we're going to be able to look at putting into place in future. Thank you.
So thank you. So we do have time for just a couple of questions, but if I can remind Rachel that if you can get ready to present next, that would be great. And also, if you have further questions, the time that we have, if you can conduct those post-session, that would be fantastic. So any questions? Yes.
So you said that you'd asked them about like the final year, like if you could give advice to final year students. Was it just final year students that you gave advice? I just asked them just because I know that for a lot of people who drop out of university, a lot of them drop out in the first year. So we were specifically trying to focus on that transition time, so the specific point that they made the transition out, having graduated. So we did ask just about to final year students.
Sorry, any other questions? Thank you.
You said your research question was why are employment prospects so poor for graduates? Did you consider recruiting some employers?
So, and this is actually part of a little bit of part of a slightly wider study. So at the moment we're focusing specifically on sort of the university experience. So we have information from autistic graduates, but also from graduates with mental health conditions and the specialist support services at the university. We would ideally have liked to look at sort of employers as well, but one of the things with that is there's so many different options that people go into. Some of the graduates do go into employment, but a lot go into things like postgraduate study or having a gap year and things as well. So at the moment our focus has been on what universities can do to support the students with that transition out.
That's lovely, thank you very much. So we're going to move on with Rachel, who's going to be talking about When My Autism Broke, shining a light on menopause in autistic women. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for listening. So I'm going to be talking a bit about development, and in humans, development and maturation are driven by hormones, chemical messengers that cause changes in the body, and specifically they're driven by the brain areas that actually control and regulate hormones. And so if you're biologically female, it turns out that there are certain points in life where there's a major reorganization of these brain systems that control hormones. And of course, along with that, there's a major reorganization and major changes to the body and the way you think and the brain and so forth. And interestingly, these periods of immense change are sensitive periods in which we are more vulnerable to mental ill health, rates of suicidality increase, we're more vulnerable to physical ill health, and also things that have a negative impact on us, like stress. Actually, the impact is heightened during these sensitive periods. So one such period like this is the onset of menstruation, menarche, and we've seen in a few studies with autistic people that the onset of menstruation and dealing with menstruation can be a really challenging thing for autistic people to face. However, interestingly, menopause is another time of life where the body goes through immense changes. Menopause is the end of the woman's reproductive cycle when menstruation periods cease. And it's a time of life where women experience a surge in mental ill health and anxiety, depression, cognitive changes, problems with their memory, executive function. They experience increased physical health problems, life-threatening illnesses, and indeed increase in suicide. But we actually know nothing at all. There hasn't been a single study on how autistic people cope with the menopausal transition. So this was a preliminary pilot study to explore that. We did a two-pronged approach here, where the first part was a participatory research focus group, which was an online synchronous discussion, and then we followed that up with individual interviews. I'm just going to focus here on our focus group, and we analysed that with thematic analysis. And so these are comments from 8 participants, 8 autistic people. So our thematic analysis revealed several things. The first one, really striking, was just a general lack of knowledge and also support and interest from professionals. And that was reflected at a broader level in terms of very little research out there on ageing, but nothing out there on the menopause and autism. And you can see here this person has said there was 0 clue and 0 interest. And this actually meant that our participants were very, very, very well informed, because they weren't able to rely on professionals to know the best way to manage their menopausal symptoms. They weren't getting anything from professionals, and therefore their expertise was very much self-led. They were all very, very knowledgeable, and they really emphasised how support and knowledge needs to come from within the autistic community into autism-led expertise, which is seen in this quote, really about harvesting people's experiences and feeding that back to professionals so that they can help people in future. People talked about how the effects of menopause, which at times could be quite dramatic, for many of our participants, they were the catalyst to getting a late diagnosis. So menopause making life more difficult was kind of like a tipping point that then led them to seek a diagnosis. And indeed, menopause sensory problems were heightened, problems with executive function were heightened, communication difficulties, sleep problems, mental health problems, anxiety, depression, people feeling more suicidal. The effects of menopause were basically exacerbating a lot of the difficulties that people were already experiencing and adding new ones on. So you can see from our quotes that people were experiencing much more extreme traumatic meltdowns, violence with self-injury. People were feeling quite suicidal. They wouldn't mind if, you know, things just ended now. People were saying that their autism seemed heightened. The cracks in the mask started to appear, and everyday life, which had already been challenging, was just that bit more challenging, and it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Menopause kind of was a tipping point for them. And where they'd found strategies where their autism was working well for them in everyday life, menopause stopped that. It was a tipping point. So I'm going to wrap up there. This is just our preliminary thematic analysis, and we have to analyse our individual interviews. But I just want to really raise awareness of the menopause as a time where autistic people are likely to be even more vulnerable, and we really need to kind of increase understanding of what it's like for them, and increase knowledge and support. And I'll stop there.
So thank you, Rachel. That was great wrapping up. So do we have any questions?
I do. I'm Sally Ann. I'm a clinician, but I'm also involved in adult autism research. My question is slightly to the side of that. As someone with ADHD, but not autism, plenty of it in the family, but not for me, I noticed very similar experiences at menopause. It's as though, you know, something just fell off a cliff. I really do. The comment about, you know, my autism worked for me up to that point and then it broke. I could say much the same about my ADHD. Do you know whether there's much work done on the impact of menopause and ADHD, or menopause and the combination of ADHD and autism?
Well, do you know, there isn't a single study on the menopause and autism. There isn't a single study. There was one study that I could find on the menopause, the impact of the menopause on disabled people, but it was about physical disability.
Okay.
There was nothing at all on autism, on ADHD, any kind of neurodiversity. So it's clearly a field that's really crying out to be filled.
So if we can take one more question whilst we're preparing for Amy. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for that, Rachel. That was great. With the within the research, was there any positive stuff that came out of it for some of the women?
Yes, there absolutely was. This is coming out more in the individual interviews, but one of them I was working on just this morning was talking about how with the menopause some people felt a reduction on the pressure to be kind of stereotypically female. Someone had a great quote, but they felt a kind of because they were kind of having to camouflage on two levels. They had to appear neurotypical and they had to appear female, sexy, pretty, blah blah blah, and they felt a reduction in that second pressure. They no longer seemed needed to be interested in sexual relationships and in being beautiful and wearing makeup and all these things. And so there are some positive, but they're coming out more in the individual interviews.
So thank you, Rachel. And as I said before, I know there's lots of questions, but there'll be lots of time post-session, yes, to have discussions about that. And now we're going to be with Amy, who is talking about understanding the phenomena of mate crime in autistic adults. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Hi, okay, so yes, that is exactly what I'm going to talk about, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So to start off, just to define mate crime. Mate crime is a subset of disability hate crime in which the perpetrator or the person who commits it is known to the victim. So this might be someone like a friend, a family member, or a support worker. And it's worth pointing out that whilst anyone can be victimised by somebody close to them, there are certain factors that make disabled people more likely to be a victim of mate crime. And the majority of disability hate crime can actually be accounted for by those known to the victim. It can encompass a range of different acts, so from things like theft and financial abuse to sexual exploitation, but also things like just humiliation and cruelty that really draw upon a person's personal vulnerabilities that are only really accessed by people close to them, and then used against somebody. So really particularly unpleasant. And there's been some debate around the use of the term mate crime and how useful that is. So the Crown Prosecution Service have argued that the term might potentially be confusing for someone who's been victimised because you don't think of a friend as someone who can be mean to you. But I think that's about as accurate as saying domestic violence can't exist because a spouse would never be harmful to their partner. It's a bit of a misnomer, and mate crime does not happen in a vacuum. There's been a lot of research suggesting that actually examining that friendship aspect is very important, because if we don't look at that, it's very difficult to look at what we can do to support people and what we can do to try and prevent it in the first place. So why examine this in autistic people? Well, we know that some autistic people find it difficult to kind of pick up on subtle social signals, and manipulation is one of those that might be very difficult, picked up when you're being lied to, for instance. And the Wirral Autistic Society in a survey found that 88% of the people who completed their survey had been victimised by somebody close to them. So it's possible that autistic people are disproportionately affected by mate crime. So the Association for Real Change back in 2013 pointed out some factors that might contribute towards vulnerability, and they argued that yes, we are all vulnerable, but there are certain factors that might make people more vulnerable, what we call situationally vulnerable. And this is that everybody needs friends, everybody kind of has this desire to be in the company of other people at least some of the time. But often disabled people can live very isolated lives and can be very socially excluded, often more likely to live in poverty, might possibly be outside of some support system. And there's a lot of, as been mentioned previously, a lot of historical attitudes towards disability that dehumanises people and marginalises them. Learned compliance is also something that's really important that I want to touch on towards the end of the talk, because I think it's highly relevant to this research area. So we wanted to examine this in autistic adults, and there's very little empirical evidence looking at experience of mate crime, possibly because it's such a bleak topic to ask people about. But there's lots of theoretical evidence, but not so much empirical. So this was really very investigative, and what we aimed to do was try and get a little bit of information from a group of autistic adults to then think about how to move forward in a wider group of people. So we used IPA, that's already been outlined by someone else, so I'm not going to attempt to say it. We used opportunity sampling and recruited 5 autistic adults, 2 women, 3 men, all aged between 20 and 25. That's obviously quite a limit in age range. We didn't purposefully recruit people from the same age group. It was just through the sample that came forward. And all of them self-identified as having relatively low support needs. One participant was in supported living. And all of the participants, bar one, had gotten their diagnosis in childhood, so only one had recently gotten their diagnosis. and they were asked questions about their diagnosis, so how it had impacted on them, their understanding of their identity and themselves, and what kind of friendships they had, whether they could identify kind of things they thought were really good within their friendships, and whether they had any social difficulties, whether they'd experienced bullying previously, and then what they perceive mate crime to be, and the kind of things that they might fall under that, and whether they'd personally experienced anything that might be classified as mate crime. And then these recorded independently by both myself and my master's student Samantha Foster, who worked on the project, and then we pulled those codes to pull out the superordinate and sub-themes, which I'm going to go on to now. We also invited the participants to comment on whether they thought that was an accurate representation. So these were the three main superordinate themes: perceptions and learning the formula, socializing, it's more complicated than that, and taking advantage of you. And I'm going to discuss each of those. So all of the participants that we interviewed spoke kind of with a mixed view about their diagnosis. So they identified that it had been really important in gaining an understanding of themselves, but that they also were really reluctant to disclose it to people. And they gave this idea that they didn't want to be seen as lesser than other people, that they didn't want people to think about them in a negative way or treat them differently to other people. So they were really distancing themselves from the label. And a couple of them really stressed this: I'm high functioning, I'm a high functioning adult. And this really can be a bit of an issue. I mean, it suggests maybe an internalized negativity around disability and around autistic identity in some people, but that can also result in a lack of support that might make people more vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And contrary to the somewhat misguided belief that autistic people don't think about other people's thoughts, our participants were also really high in self-monitoring behaviours, so they thought a lot about what other people thought of them and were really fearful of being socially excluded. So they kind of talked about being careful about what they said and not talking too much about things that interested them for fear of being ostracised. So that was quite an issue. In terms of socialising, they all pointed out that there were things that they struggled with socially, so they kind of learned how to socialise with other people, and picked up on things that they'd done right and wrong as they'd grown up. All of them said actually ageing had helped the process, but they did say that things like sometimes reading people's facial expressions or the underlying subtext when people aren't being straightforward with what they say could be difficult. And that could be super exhausting for them, so really effortful to do that, and then could lead to high levels of anxiety because of having to constantly be thinking about what's going on. And that's really, it's a problem because you've got that two-leveled issue there of not maybe being able to pick up on those kind of maybe signals to manipulation, but also people being particularly nefarious and using that exhaustion against somebody. So kind of wearing them down by being quite, dishonest and confusing in what they say to particularly exhaust someone and then take advantage more. But they did stress that they had good support networks and spend time with people who were like-minded, whether that be similar interests or actually just having autistic friends. So one of the participants talked about how important that had been in just being able to be herself and not camouflage and be with people who understood her. On the subject of mate crime itself, only one of the participants had been victimised by someone close to them as an adult, but all of the participants had been bullied at some point in their lives by both school colleagues and people they classified as friends. And they said it was worse than bullying because bullying's quite obvious from the get-go. You know someone doesn't like you, but when someone's pretending to be your friend, that's really harmful and deceitful. And they said that they thought autistic people could be more vulnerable, but that it wasn't limited to autistic people, so that people with other disabilities, people with mental health issues, and the elderly as well. And when you look at that kind of as a co-occurring issue, so aging in line with having a diagnosis, that could potentially compound. But they did say it's really important to have these support networks, that if you have someone who can help you identify it, it's very important. This was the standout quote for me out of everything that was said, and this relates back to that point on social compliance. The one participant that had been victimised by someone that they knew said, I find it really hard to say no because I don't want people to think that I'm rude. And this is important in two ways. So it's just looking at kind of being able to stick up for oneself. But if we think back to what was said this morning about childhood interventions, a lot of interventions focus on compliance and always being polite and always doing as you're told and going along with what people tell you to do. And that could lead to autistic people not trusting their intuition and being victimized by people who use that to their advantage. And that's a massive problem, and something that I think we really need to focus on going forward. So as a follow-up, I'm conducting some further research online. I'm trying to get a wider sample of adults. The average age at the moment is about 35, so we've got participants from 18 to 57 at the minute, so a little bit of a wider spread. And what can we do with this? Well, we can provide tools for people and do some kind of, relationship training, look at recognizing healthy versus unhealthy aspects in relationships and what to do if this happens to you, who you might go to. The second one is a rather grander aim, which is trying to break down wider societal perceptions of autism and disability and trying to deal with that double empathy problem and really combat dehumanization so people who are different aren't just seen as an easy target. And with that, I'd just like to thank Samantha Foster, who collected the data on this, everybody who's taken part in the research so far, and everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And if I can just say from a personal point of view, I love your wider aim. So, any questions? Thank you.
Obviously, this is quite an emotional topic, as you said, and could cause distress to participants. So what kind of measures have you been taking to avoid that when doing this research?
So it is something that's really sensitive. We've been directing people to kind of appropriate services if they'd like to seek help. Samantha, who did the interviews, her background's in social work, so she'd conducted many interviews, but it's something that's really important, and it's kind of directing people and making sure we're not causing too much distress is, it's one of my biggest worries in this.
Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't have questions.
That's okay.
In your research, did you come across any examples of autism to autism bullying?
Oh, that's interesting. No, not so far. That's not something that's come up, but that would be something interesting.
So
I think
autistic people taking advantage of other autistic people. Learned behaviour they've been able to transfer.
That's
I don't know, but
it's a really good question. Yeah.
Can we have time for a final question? Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, it's good to actually finally have someone looking at wider issues, because I find too much sort of focusing on the individual rather than the context. So I'm glad that at some point, even if you haven't done it yet, you're going to be looking at how you change attitudes, and certainly it's not just bullying of autistic people. But I wonder, you mentioned sort of training in positive relationships for autistic people. I would suggest there is actually a need for training for all people.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not just how you avoid being vulnerable, but also the sort of, that it's not a positive way to behave to take advantage of other people, but that it isn't actually satisfying. But obviously then there are all the wider issues which are much more deep-seated problems in society, which make people almost have a need to take advantage of other people because of what, which is much wider. But I think it's sort of sometimes autistic people, whatever group's been studied, is seen in isolation rather than actually
in context.
In context, but also comparing the experiences with other people, even things like, what are the similar and different factors between hate crime, bullying of autistic people and other disabled people? Then of course autistic people with other characteristics, and then bullying of people who are not disabled but are still picked on.
Do you have a brief response, and then we'll...
Yes.
Oh, I don't think I could come up with a brief response, because I agree with everything you say. Essentially, would be my brief response, and I think it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and next is Megan Frieth from Sheffield.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about the lived experiences of females who received an autism diagnosis in middle to late adulthood. And I'm just introduced myself. I'm at the University of Sheffield. I'm co-director of the Sheffield Autism Research Lab. So this research was led by my fabulous clinical doctorate student, Alexandra Leadham, who's just recently graduated, and in collaboration with another 2 clinical psychologists in the clinical service at Sheffield. So I'm only going to be able to talk about a few of the details about the study today, but if you would like to read it in full, it was published just last month in the journal Autism, so you can have a look there for more information. I want to start off by thinking about why it's important to know about the experiences of females who are diagnosed in mid to late adulthood. I think in general our model of understanding of autism that's developed over the last 30-40 years or more, has largely been based on males, and with females often being overlooked. So diagnosis typically does occur much later for females compared to males. And in general, the diagnostic process is generally seen as an important milestone, but is experienced as involving lots of challenges and being quite an arduous process. There are lots of barriers to overcome for individuals before they even get to that stage of receiving a diagnosis. And currently there is very little research that specifically focuses on older females. So perhaps sometimes it might be involved in wider research projects, but there may be very specific issues that are relevant to older females, and I think it's important to consider what those might be. So in terms of the diagnostic process for females, in terms of ratios of diagnosis, it seems that in childhood, in particular, autism is much more commonly diagnosed in males than females, so a ratio of about 5-1. But when we reach adulthood, the ratio of diagnosis is much more similar, so perhaps more close to 2-1. Sorry, is this a new 5-minute talk? Yes. Okay, so we were asking what's the lived experience of autistic females. So we did IPA, which has been introduced a few times, thanks very much for that, and with 11 females. And so the participants were between 40 and 65 years of age. The mean age of diagnosis was 46. So we had a very open interview schedule that we developed in collaboration with autistic adults. So IPA is an approach where you're not imposing a theory or preconceptions, and you're really trying to explore people's lived experiences. You're trying to interpret what their interpretations are of their own experiences. And this is called a double hermeneutic process. So we're going to the details of how we do it. I just want to focus on the themes that emerged from this research. So people told us that autism is very much a hidden condition. Lots of people, so we can see the frequency with how often people mentioned these themes. So out of our 11 participants, we can see that these are very common throughout the individuals. The process of acceptance was very important to individuals. So initially there might be searches for understanding, and then people went through a phase of transition in general and relived their life through a new lens. There were many discussions about reflections on the past and the grief involved when they thought about their former selves, as these are individuals that have lived the vast majority of their adult lives, over 20 years, without a diagnosis, and so perhaps without that understanding. In terms of things that impacted the self-understanding, the impact of others was really profound, and particularly in terms of stereotyped assumptions that others may have made. People generally tended to tell us that they embrace a new identity on the autism spectrum, and this involved negotiating relationships in different ways. They had changes in terms of well-being and views of the self, and we discussed the meaning of diagnosis. So I think it really brings the findings to life when you consider some of the individual quotes. I'm just going to read out a few for you. So here Lily told us that a clinician would say, oh, you've got borderline personality disorder, and Lily explained to him why she wasn't BPD and she wasn't getting any answers. She just stopped going, she just stopped asking for help. In terms of the process of acceptance, Hannah told us, I felt really bad for myself as a child, blaming myself for things not being good enough or being slow and not like everyone else. In terms of the diagnostic impact of others, and this did seem to be really profound, so Elizabeth said, when I told my dad, he was like, you don't have autism, you're perfect, there's nothing wrong with you, so I can't talk to him if I've had a bad day. And I think this was really difficult to hear from Elizabeth, as the impact of her father, although maybe he was trying to be helpful and supportive, was having quite a negative impact on her self-understanding. In terms of the new identity on the autism spectrum, Meryl told us, I don't get as much anxiety as I used to because I've got better understanding, understand it better, I'm actually better able to deal with it. And Meryl was actually our oldest participant at 64 years of age, and she'd received her diagnosis at 62, so it's even making a positive impact at that point in somebody's life. So overall, it seems that there is limited understanding of autism in females, but the diagnostic process did seem to facilitate a shift from powerlessness to having an increased sense of agency. But misplaced labels are common and detrimental, and the diagnostic process can be really painful. So just to finish up with the clinical implications, it seems that accurate, timely diagnosis is really important. Undertrained professionals can really cause distress for women. Clinicians shouldn't rely on the reports of others, as pretty much all of our women were told us that they engaged in camouflaging behaviours. And it's a tricky thing that should be discussed with people about disclosure. It's not a straightforward process to decide what to do. Coming to terms with a diagnosis extensive process, and we need to think about ways to support self-compassion, as this seems to be a really helpful process. And there's just some thoughts on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. So we have time for just one question, please. You have a question? Perhaps if you have any questions come to mind, you can address those after session, or do we have one? My apologies.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on the point about undertrained professionals causing distress?
Yes, sure. A lot of our participants have told us that they've been misdiagnosed, and that they'd, when they tried to have discussions with professionals at different points in their lives, then they hadn't been listened to, and they just hadn't had a positive experience, and that they've been misunderstood, and this had had a very negative impact on their own mental health.
Okay, thank you. So our next presenter is Jonathan Vincent. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. 5 minutes. Finish at 12:50. Yeah, you got if you can have 12 minutes, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great set of talks and lovely to be here. So I'm going to sort of follow on a little bit from what Alana and Rebecca talked about in terms of the transition to employment for autistic students and recent graduates. I'm based at York St John, but I'm also a director of what's called Pro Autism, which is a group set up with autistic and non-autistic people to work with employers to help them understand about autistic talent and how they could better support people into employment. So it's already been established, the fact that there's an increasing number of students coming to university and disclosing their autism diagnoses. There's probably a much larger group of people who are not disclosing or not yet gone through a diagnostic process, particularly girls. But in the States, we know that they reckon there's about 500,000 adolescents or children who are going to become adults and are going to go to university. That's about 250,000 kids who will be at college or university. And this sort of fits into what Keren was talking about in the idea of what happens next. It's brilliant that we've got people coming to university and that we've got an inclusive society in that sense, but I think we've kind of missing what happens at the end. I did a bit of a scoping review of universities, so any university which had research degree awarding powers, so about 111 across England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And this is the autism specific provision that they had. And you can see that in terms of employment, there's only 10, and that's if they have it on their website, that's how I could find out, compared to Transition In, and Jiedi's talk at Bath is a really good example of that, and they also have employment, so you're both. But you can see there's 4 times more about induction and very little in terms of what happens next. And this is kind of what I'm really interested in, so that was the gap I think has been established. So a very quick whistle-stop tour. It's in a kind of an exploratory qualitative study with a relatively big sample, I guess. I did 21 semi-structured interviews with students and graduates, and 10 students and 11 graduates. And then 16 focus groups with 58 community stakeholders. And that was part of a pro-autism event, so it was organised and run by pro-autism in that sense. And we collected the data and have analysed that together. So I just want to sort of take you through some of the key findings. I know we don't have a lot of time and people are probably thinking about lunch. So the 4 key things I guess we can see are around particularly mobilities. And by that I mean it's not just about getting a job, it's about the capabilities people have within jobs to be mobile, like being socially mobile, etc. is about movement beyond just a physical movement. So I'll talk through briefly these 4 different themes. The first one, as I said, is around employment immobilities, and that fits into the wider literature that has been well established. And if anyone was at the morning breakfast thing, Brett and Amy talked about that. But here are just a few quotations which I think exemplify that. So there's so much competition for jobs, it's a lot easier to have someone that's got no special needs or additional needs. You fall under the radar. So many people just end up going through the unemployed-employed cycle forever. I think it was 2,000 jobs I applied for before I got my current job. I think for autistic graduates, they're going into a very competitive labour market, as all graduates are going into. But for them, it's a different experience, and it's one which is much more challenging, particularly where they're trying to consider to what extent do I want to disclose my autistic identity. I mean, probably by the time you've got to job 1,999, you're pretty deflated, and that correlation between these experiences and mental health has been pretty well established. A big part of it is the processes through which people go, and I would say we probably need to think about some of these in terms of it's not just human beings, it's non-human actors that also play a role in that. Application forms, job adverts are a big part. One thing is the way that job descriptions are written. Many companies have a formula, and it looks very much the same, even if it's for different jobs. One section in there is specific for the job and everything else is just standard. And I think normally you'd understand you don't have to meet all the criteria 100%, but if you're autistic and you read really carefully, you can probably exclude yourself from all the jobs because you can't meet everything 100%. So in terms of how both autistic people are reading job descriptions, they're having to interpret something which maybe neurotypical people know, yeah, they don't really mean everything. And I could probably massage my CV enough to make it look like I do everything. But for them, they're almost excluding themselves rather than being excluding sometimes. So with our group Pro Autism, we're working with employers to say, look at your job adverts. Do you need everything there? You probably don't. What do you need? So to educate them around some of these aspects. Disclosure has already been mentioned by someone, and I think is probably one of the key areas. And as I said, if you're applying for 2,000 jobs, very often people get to a point where they think, maybe I need to stop disclosing because maybe that's the barrier. Maybe every time I disclose, that's the reason it's going into the no pile. That said, it was interesting that one of the talks earlier talked about whether people see their autism diagnosis as a disability. So typically it doesn't ask, are you autistic? It says, are you disabled? So in this one it says, well, there's an option for people to say, you've got a disability, yes or no. I've got Asperger's, I don't see myself as disabled. So they tick no, but then perhaps when they get to the interview, it would have been helpful to have ticked yes, actually. And again, there were issues around how do we go about that? What are the practical issues? There's nothing that tells anyone how to go about it, like when's it appropriate to bring it up in the interview? How do I bring it up? Do I do it lightheartedly? Do you do it kind of jokingly? Do you do it seriously? When should you? There's nothing specific. I kind of wish there was a little handbook. And I think that speaks to the sense that it's not just a question of do you disclose and when, but it's how do you do it? Do I disclose to the manager? Do I disclose to my colleagues? Do I disclose before the interview, during the interview, after the interview, on the first day of work? And how do I do that? What's the format? And obviously that will be different for every person in every context. But it's a big barrier in terms of trying to get the right adjustments in place. The social model of disability is really important and typically kind of doesn't focus as much on the body and says, well, it's society we need to work on. But actually, I think in terms of this data, there is a different embodied experience, and I think that's quite important. And that's both in terms of the strengths that can come out of that. So people with AS are very organised, with excessive worrying. They often get things done. Because I'm always thinking about work, I'm always thinking, I've got to do this tomorrow, and I'm thinking about what needs to be done because I'm generally a perfectionist. And it means that it has to be great, it has to be on point. And Stephen Kapp and Jenny Russell and others wrote a really, really good paper around autistic strengths. And one of the things they said is, yeah, these are strengths, but there need to be moderating factors. So how do you almost convert that into something which is really beneficial in the right context? So there's a different embodied experience, which could be a positive, a real strength. At the same time, sensory overload is an embodied experience as well. And this is a graduate. So yeah, my mood will change dramatically in the space of about a minute. I noticed it because sometimes you don't always notice it, but you feel the physical evidence of it. I just felt this wave of absolute rage come over me. I was like, oh dear, this isn't good. It's weird because you're kind of partially conscious of what's happening, because at that point I was like, shit, I'm gonna have a meltdown and it's gonna be on the shop floor. Great. I just literally walked past my colleague and said, I'm having a meltdown, I'll be out the back, tell the manager. And she worked in an environment where her colleagues and her manager were really, really supportive, and that was brilliant. But that probably wouldn't be everybody's experience. And I think recognizing and acknowledging that kind of different embodied experience is important as well. And thinking about the social aspects. How do workplaces change to accommodate for that and make affordances so that for her, that she can carry on working and be successful. And the final one is around resourcing employment mobilities. And that really is, particularly for students in universities, what do career staff do? And Keren's talked about some of the great stuff that happens at Keele. But quite often, I guess, there's a bit of a gap, and we know that with career services. Typically, kind of, the expectation is, well, you've got a degree, you might have a first-class degree from a Russell Group university, you're an intelligent person, here's a list of websites, apply for a job. Where actually their experience was, I can't do that, you need to give me more help than that. And that was kind of really clear. That said, where there is support in place, and Bath's Easter Summer Schools, a good example, it can be really, really beneficial. So I was on the employment course, it was really helpful for things like building up CV, hadn't really thought about. I'd spoke to careers and they gave me a mentor, because they have a scheme, and they set her up with someone who works for the United Nations. So where there is support in place, it's a really, really beneficial thing for that transition to employment, particularly. So those are the four main themes. The implications, I think, are that firstly, there's an unevenness. I don't think I'll even need three. I've spoken so fast. I hope you've been able to interpret my Northern Irish accent. There's an unevenness of employment mobilities across certainly the sample that I looked at, and I think that corresponds to more generally in the adult population. But importantly, how those link to other capabilities and mobility. So in terms of having employment leads typically to independent living, different choices about relationships, what you can do in life, etc. So those two things are linked, and I think that's important to see. So for this group of students leaving university, highly skilled, highly qualified, how can we make sure that we level that in terms of mobilities? I think the barriers are both human, they're people. That said, it's not one person getting a job, there are multiple people involved. The reason I wanted to look at sort of different community stakeholders is because it's David Nicholas in Calgary talks about the ecosystem of employment. It is many, many people, and in that, I should have said, in that sample were parents, carers, autistic adults, people from the Department for Work and Pensions, supported employment providers, careers advisors. We invited some employers, they didn't come. So there are barriers which are human, but there are also barriers which are non-human in terms of those job adverts, interviews, etc. Higher education staff have the potential to make a huge difference, as do many other people outside of it. And finally, I think to appreciate the differentially embodied immobilities that Busher talks about, and think about how we can make accommodations and how employers and workplaces could make accommodations on those bases. And finally then, some recommendations. I think at an empirical level, like Alana and Rebecca said, this is an area that we just don't know enough about. There's a growing population of autistic students in universities, leaving universities. What happens? We need to know more about that and how to better support them. Theoretical level, we need to think more about the theories of transition and things that go along with that. At a policy level, we need to lean on education institutions to have policies. We need to lean on employers to have neurodiversity policies, perhaps. But to go beyond the rhetoric that can often be there, and having a policy is one thing, doing something about it is very different. So at a practical level, how do we ensure that we have better practice in higher education and in workplaces to ensure that those with an autism diagnosis who have huge amounts to give and to add to our communities and our industries, that they're able to do that. So that's all from me.
So, thank you, Jonathan. There's a lot of important information there, and we really appreciate this working to time because it gives us time for a question. So, yes.
I just wanted to say, there was a survey last year funded by the Law Society into why do disabled adults not progress in the law. That's quite interesting. I did send an email. I didn't take part in the studies. I didn't feel like there was anything I really had to add beyond the fact that I did know. But a lot of very subtle cultural barriers to progressing in professions. Now, my background is in law. I've done legal practice course. I never applied for jobs as a solicitor because of that. Just briefly, if anyone is interested in reading non-legal judgments, I suggest you have a look at both Government Legal Service and Brooks, and that was in 2017. And it concerns a young lady who applied for Government Legal Service and was asked to sit a multiple choice question. She asked her is, what would you do in this situation? And it's gone all the way to the Court of Appeal Tribunal. Interesting how the civil service have tried to defend that by saying if you can't do this multiple choice, what you're talking about recruitment practices, then really you can't do the job, and that was their defence. But anyone who's interested in that sort of thing, I strongly recommend you having a look at full judgment.
So, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our session. So, before you carry on some of these really exciting discussions, I'd just like to share our thanks to every speaker who presented today. It's been really exciting. And thank you so much, everybody in the room, because it's really, really important that moving forward and having impact is having all of us here. Thank you.
I'll just say I've got
Okay,
a poster type thing. I did it in a bit of a rush, but if you want the information, you can take that here. Great.